So this ritual has been ingrained into our lives in ways that we probably could never have imagined. And I've been doing this since I don't even remember when. I know that it's something that I do all the time, but now it has taken on a heightened significance. It's not just about general hygiene anymore. A surgeon would have to be very mindful of this ritual every time he prepares for surgery. But I find myself, I'm being just as mindful every time I wash my hands. Did I miss a spot? Did I get that finger? Who would have thought that improper washing could mean the difference between life and death? And hand washing isn't just preferable anymore, it's essential. So let's say you're in a public washroom and you saw someone leave and they didn't wash their hands. What would you say? What would you do? I think in the very least you would probably sneer at them and wonder why they're so ignorant and unaware. And some of you may even have the courage to speak up or even confront them. So this ritual of hand washing is a very sensitive thing at this time. And in today's passage of scripture, we come across this exact same sensitive issue. Jesus' disciples were in the public eye and they skipped out on this ceremonial hand washing. And can you imagine? In full sight of all the people there, they were grabbing their food, but they didn't have clean hands. So you can imagine the uproar this generates. So today's teaching isn't exactly about germs or hygiene or viruses. It's about being able to adapt. It's about having the courage and discernment to adapt and even let go of certain traditions. It's about being able to pivot and adapt in this ever-changing expression of faith and spirituality. So here's my main idea for today. Christian traditions and customs can be deep and meaningful. However, we need to remember that these practices can be adapted so that we maintain the centrality of Christ in our life and witness. So here it is. This is what we're going to look at this day. So let's think about traditions and customs and rituals for a little bit. We all have them. We have our holiday traditions like Christmas and Easter, and we have our family traditions like birthdays and graduations and anniversaries. We have things like our daily coffee, our weekend sleep-in, and our monthly haircuts. For me, I enjoy my morning bike rides. I love seeing the sun rise early in the morning. I meet up with my riding buddies and we chit-chat as we ride up. And then we stop at a nice bakery. And there we order coffee or croissants, maybe a bolo bao. So we eat, we joke, we laugh, and then we take a group shot so we can post it on Strava. And then when we get home, we hit likes for everyone's efforts. So this is a ritual that I enjoy. And some of you have long-standing family rituals and traditions that you have passed from generation to generation. Things like maybe a family reunion or dinner at grandma's house or camping trips. And these rituals, they create long-lasting memories and we cherish them and we talk about them. And rituals and traditions, they are very important because they actually bond us. They create this deep sense of identity and belonging. And they also transmit deeply held values and beliefs in our culture. For example, in my background, there are traditional roles that husband and wives take. Wives are expected to fulfill her social mandate of self-sacrifice. She's supposed to submit for the sake of the family. So she gives up her personal aspirations so that the family or her husband can have honor and succeed. A few years back, there was a romantic comedy called Crazy Rich Asians. I'm sure you've seen it, and what a great film it was. And I'm sure all the ladies, and probably most of the guys here, you've probably watched this too. And in this film, we see a clash of cultures and tradition. We have this super rich young heir, Nick, and he falls in love with a young American girl called Rachel. And Nick, he wants to bring her to Singapore so that she can meet his extended family. But his mother, Nick's mother, Eleanor, as the head matriarch, she disapproves. She does not like Rachel. and she sees Rachel as a commoner. She won't measure up. She's too independent and will not be able to make sacrifices for the sake of the family name. So let me show you a clip of their first meeting over making dumplings. Ooh, you can cut the tension with a knife. A clash of traditions and values. So let's look at today's story and see what is clashing. The Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands before they eat." Jesus calls the crowd to him and says to them, Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death." Okay, so this wasn't a random meeting. These big religious bigwigs, they've been watching Jesus like a hawk, and they have an agenda. So they're watching him, and they spot a flagrant violation, and they call Jesus out. Jesus' disciples have dirty hands. So let's remember, hand washing here was not a hygienic thing, it was a ritual. It was a religious ritual showing purification, and it's still done to this day. We see this young Hasidic man, he washes his hands before he prays at the Western Wall of Jerusalem. And this ritual is done whenever they eat bread. However, this practice is not actually commanded in the Torah. It's not actually prescribed in the Jewish scriptures, but it was tradition. It was supplementary teaching called oral tradition. And this oral tradition was all kind of accumulated and written down called the Mishnah. So it was this accusation against Jesus. They broke oral tradition of the elders. To them, this tradition, this oral tradition, was equally on par with the Word of God. So dirty hands is right up there with murder and adultery and theft. So how does Jesus respond? Is he apologetic? Is he defensive? Well, we all know that in situations like this, Jesus is rarely apologetic. Jesus actually doesn't deny that his disciples were breaking this tradition, but he gives a very surly response. Verse 3. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death." Okay, so why does he bring up the fourth commandment? It seems so out of left field. What does honoring parents have anything to do with washing? Well, the reason why Jesus brings this up is to show them an example of the hypocrisy of the entire system. In their system of belief, they knew the fourth commandment was to honor their father and mother, to take care of them. But the Mishnah, the oral tradition, had a loophole, and the loophole allowed them to substitute by giving money to the temple or giving money to the religious leaders, and this money should instead have been used to take care of their aging parents. And so Jesus knew the system inside out. He knew all these loopholes, and he rebukes them. He calls them out on all of these deplorable practices. And he gives them strong rebuke from Isaiah, verse 7. "You hypocrites, you hypocrites." Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." So here Jesus quotes the prophecy of Isaiah to rebuke them. He calls them hypocrites. And their faith is all show and no substance. They had, the nice hats, the beautiful clothing, and everything actually looked good from the outside. But that's as far as it went. It was all fluff, all decoration. There was nothing real about their love and worship of God. Where does true worship come from? Where does worship find its source? Where does it come from? Of course, it comes from the heart. It comes from inside here. And when you allow God in here, He changes you, He transforms you, He motivates you so that everything that you do and say flows from this place of worship and honesty. And from here, your thoughts, your motives, they are genuine expressions of thanksgiving because God has been doing His work here. So I think the real caution for all of us is when we think, oh no, we're not like them. We're not even close. We're good, decent people. We're the in-group. We're the true followers of Jesus because our motives are always good, always pure, and always holy. No way, we're not like those hypocrites. You know, this is the mindset of pride and arrogance. And this is how hypocrisy begins. We're not like them or you. And this is why we need daily self-examination. We need to invite the Spirit of God to search deep within our hearts to reveal the pride that's there. And once we recognize it, we need to confess it immediately. We need to repent so that our hearts can be renewed by God. And this is an expression of worship. It submits to God in humility over and over again. So after this open rebuke, Jesus turns to the crowd, to the people that were there, and He says something. Verse 10. Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouths, that is what defiles them. So that's common sense, right? Whatever you eat, with clean hands or dirty hands, it has absolutely no bearing on your spiritual life. So He's implicating that this ceremonial hand washing really wasn't that important anymore. This tradition used to be important. It had been important for thousands and thousands of years when it's performed properly. When this ritual is done, it reflected your inner devotion and dependency on God. It represented a cleansed heart coming to God. But of course, the Pharisees, they completely changed it. Their hand washing had no bearing on their true heart's condition, because when they spoke, it showed their true heart. And their words were mean, they were offensive and deceptive. And Jesus calls them blind. They want to be teachers, they want to be guides, but He says, let them alone. They are blind guides. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. Tradition. The dictionary defines tradition as a long-established custom or belief that has been passed from one generation to another. A long-established custom or belief that has been passed from one generation to another. Traditions and customs, as we've said, they're very important because they bond us. They create and they transmit and they preserve our values and beliefs. However, we don't live in a static world. It's constantly changing and evolving and developing. And as people change, culture will change. Customs and traditions will also change. So what does that mean for you and me as modern people, as modern believers? How do we decide what tradition is new and old? What should we keep? What should we put away? Well, there seems to be two general schools of thought on this. Some argue that God is changeless. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So that would mean church tradition should not conform to the ways of the world, because culture and society might be in flux and change, but God isn't. So we must stand firm, trust our traditions. So this is one school of thought. The other school of thought says the opposite. It says that if Christianity is going to survive, if it's going to be relevant and connect to our current culture and its people, then we must adapt. We must find ways in the changing times. So which one do we follow? Well, I found this quote helpful. People are becoming less involved in religious institutions every day and more invested in how fast they can get answers. If religion can't do that, Google will. Well, I think he may have overstated a little bit how people look for truth, but I think he's partially correct. People will always seek for meaning and purpose. People will always be asking those deep questions of purpose, meaning, and destiny, because that's how God created us. We are spiritual people. But Google will hardly give a comprehensive answer to all these deep questions. So I believe that if Christianity is to stay relevant, if we are to be relevant, we have to discern so we can pivot and adapt. Pivot and adapt. For over 2,000 years, this is what the church has done. We have adapted and responded to all kinds of cultures and social climates. From our very, very roots in Asia Minor, from its roots in Jewish custom and language, it moved into the Hellenistic Greek world, and there it spread. It spread throughout Asia and Africa, into Europe, and finally here to the Americas. And the missionaries, those early pioneers, their faith taught us that they adapted, they changed. So that means we need to constantly pivot and adapt, but hold on to our core values. If we're going to engage our culture in meaningful ways, we do have to pivot and adapt. This, however, doesn't mean that we forget the past. It doesn't mean that we do away with all those rituals and traditions which have served us well. We don't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. No, we keep our core values, even if the externals look a little bit different. Take, for example, the Lord's Supper. In these months, even though the church is closed, we have not been able to meet in person, but God allows us to pivot and adapt. He still has allowed us to serve each other in our homes, to drink and to remember the love and sacrifice of Christ. And this is not what we normally do. It's not what we're used to, and it may not be ideal. But this is what it means to adapt. In our homegrown band, Rising Light, they've done an amazing job of pivoting and adapting. Seniors who have not been able to meet and gather for song and fellowship, so our band, we've gone to them bringing songs of hope and praise. So let's go back again to the clash of cultures and our romantic comedy, Crazy Rich Asians. The mom, Eleanor, she needed to win. She needed to win at all costs. She needed to protect and preserve the family, even if it meant her son had to give up Rachel. And a core value for her was sacrifice. Personal sacrifice for the preservation and the success of the family. And she didn't think young Rachel had it. She didn't think she had it in her because she was a commoner. Let me show you a pivotal scene in the movie. The showdown at the Mah-jong table. Warning and spoiler alert, if you didn't watch the movie, you probably want to fast forward this part. And warning number 2, ladies, you might want to have a tissue box close by. And some of you guys too, you should have some with you. So let's watch. Wow, what a powerful display of conviction, honor, and sacrifice. Even with these generational differences, even with traditions and they change and rituals change, but at the very core, what do we see? Love and sacrifice. It's still there. Rachel was able to keep her dignity, be true to herself, but it cost her deeply. She was able to sacrifice. She sacrificed out of love. Sacrifice and love. Isn't this the message of the gospel? Jesus sacrificed himself out of love. At the core of Christianity, it's always centered on Christ. He's always our reference point for life. He's the reference point to which we measure and discern and gauge what is core to our faith. You know, in ancient construction, a cornerstone, a big stone was laid first, and from this cornerstone, all other measurements came from here. And this is the reference point for everything. So as we navigate change and as we pivot and adjust, we must always keep Jesus at the core, at the center, because he is our cornerstone. He is the reference in which we adapt and always He keeps us steadfast, even through the constant sea of change. So may Christ always be with us. Amen.